The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science, technology, and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. This episode, Star Warsologies, is going to continue our chat with the legit Star Warsologist. I'm Melissa Miller, one of your co-hosts. I am the science and technology writer at Nerdist and also an Star Wars Insider freelance writer.
And I'm your other co-host, James Floyd. I'm a freelance writer for Star Wars Insider magazine and StarWars.com. This is the second part of our interview with Don Bies, who used to work at ILM and Lucasfilm. He was an archivist, a droid wrangler, even did some character appearances, including on screen, and also was an expert model maker.
Go back and listen to part 1, where we covered everything R2-D2. We left off with Don just about to tell us about his on-screen appearances. So let's get back to that.
When the special editions were happening, again, like I said, because I was that generic stormtrooper size, and I was at the archive still at that point, when they'd say, "Oh, what size person should we get for this guy?" I was like, "Well, I can wear it," And then we did the Jabba's palace scene, the redo of the musical number. They wanted the Bith character, and the Lucasfilm archives didn't have the Bith mask. That was done by Doug Beswick, who had sculpted the original one. Mm-hmm. And I knew Doug still had one. So when they asked where they can get one, I said, well, I know where you can get one, but the only caveat is I have to play him. So they said, sure. So I called up Doug. Doug rented the mask. And actually, the mask was at Celebration. It's the one that Prop Store is currently selling.
Wow.
So that was used in the original film, and it was used in the special edition. So I got to be that character. And then the other ones were makeup that they did, at the dancers were all current makeup that they had done special for them. They had a couple guys in the background playing drums. They were using original masks and costumes from Jedi. And Droopy McCool was there, although I don't think you see him in that well in our sequence. But that was the original costume for that too.
So you're in Jabba's palace at least twice then, because you're the Bith musician and you're Boba Fett.
Yeah. So that when they count off the number, I think he says Kunita, and then they cut to the Bith and the Rodian. Mm-hmm. Rodian is Nelson Hall. I go dan, 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 dan. And it was funny because we were having a rehearsal. They had brought in Michael Smuin, who's of the Smuin Ballet. Unfortunately, Michael's passed away, but he had a ballet company in San Francisco. He was a very good friend of George Lucas's. And those dancers were from the ballet. So he was on set. Michael was on set teaching them a choreographed routine. And there's Nelson and I, like, what are we supposed to do? No one gave us any routine. So we came up with our own choreography where we're doing going up and back and side to side and stuff like that. So we were just having a blast with that. And then on the day we were having a break, and George and Rick McCallum, the producer, were over by the video monitor, and they were laughing. And Rick comes over to me and says, do we have a Boba Fett costume in the archives? And the Boba Fett costume that we usually use, the one that I had worn before, I had just gone off to Washington, D.C. to be part of the Magic as a Myth museum exhibition. And so I had to think about it. I'm like, well, I mean, we have extras, they're in pieces, but there's probably a full costume there. I'm sure I knew there was. It just, they were in boxes, the helmets, all the helmets were there, and all the jumpsuits were there and so forth. So he says, at lunchtime, go up and get one. And George has this great idea. He's going to have Boba talking to the dancers. I said, oh, okay. And he says, and who can wear it? What size? I said, well, I can. So he said, okay, great. He said, so go up and get one at lunchtime, and at the end of the day, we'll shoot it. So that's what he did. And when we finished shooting, I went off and got into Boba Fett, and there's behind the scenes pictures. You see Nelson Hall is helping me get into it. He's still part of his costume. He's still trying to, help me get into my costume, because we're like, come on, guys, gotta go. And so we're like, putting things on, and I had to, by memory, pull the costume together. While I knew the characters, obviously I didn't know them that well. So I've since caught a lot of flack as to the costume and the mismatching of pieces that I did.
But you should say, dude, I was on my lunch break. I had to put this together over lunch. And did you even get to finish your lunch that day?
I ate in the car on the way up. They had a PA drive me. So
I love knowing that, because to me, that's one of the really iconic scenes that I love about the special editions, is him like flirting with the dancers. And so to know that that was a George Lucas, in the morning, and Rick McCallum having that, light bulb moment, and it all coming together makes that even more special.
And it was funny because George took me to the side and told me what he wanted me to do. Everyone else was still setting up, and it was just me and George. And he says, I want you to, when I tell you, I want you to like caress the side of her face. And he's doing this to me. He's actually touching my face. And amazing. He says, and then just walk off real cool. And I'm like, okay. And so we're up there, and I'm with the dancers, and it was Mercedes, who's the Ristal, was the character that I was mainly talking to. And we're talking, and George tells them, oh, you're flirting with them. And I put the mask on, and then they started getting really into it. They were really flirting with me and saying, asking me about, my rocket parts and stuff like that. And, if I didn't have the mask on, you would have seen me blushing a lot. And so, we're talking and everything. And I got my arm up, and I'm trying to be cool and everything. And at one point, George said, everyone look over here. And we're like, what? And, we just turned our head, and that's in the film.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He just had us look, and both Mercedes and I just went, what? Oh, okay. And then he goes back. He says, okay. And now Boba. And I didn't want to rub her face because she had this makeup on.
Right.
So I just tucked her under the chin, and I walked off. And the entire place just burst into laughter. It just it was a huge roar of laughter, and everyone, I don't know if there was applause or anything, and I thought, what was my flyover? What did I do that was so funny? Because it didn't seem funny to me. It just was like, I'm gonna get out of here, and my wife happened to be there. My wife was the stand-in for one of the digital characters. And I said, what did I do? She said, it was just funny. So we came back, and I might have done it again, but it was funny when I came back, Mercedes said, why'd you do that? And I said, what? She said, why'd you touch me and walk off? I said, George told me to. and she's like, oh, okay. Because she was left out of it. She didn't know that was going to happen. It probably would have helped for her, So I think we might have done it a second time, but I'm pretty sure the first time is the one that's in the film.
Wow. So you got lessons in smooth from George Lucas.
Yeah.
Well,
he also said, of course, when I came out, I'm wearing my glasses, right? I know I'm a meme and everything. And he comes, I walk out in front of everybody, goes, oh, look, Boba, moonlights as George's job as accountant during the day. So, and he's humiliating me in front of everybody. Thanks, George. I appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask. It seems like it would be pretty easy to be smooth when you're in the Boba Fett costume. Did you, or maybe you're just, that smooth already? But
no, that was all acting. No, it's definitely easier. Well, like I said, there's so many things to think about, like not tripping. The backpack I had was really heavy because it was one of the effects backpacks. So inside of it were metal rings and stuff for canisters for air to shoot out. And there's also a big cosmetic slash across it, like it had been damaged, right? And I've since heard rumors that there was a sequence that they were supposed to do that where it gets hit by a lightsaber, because it doesn't look like a laser blast. It looks like a lightsaber blast. Anyway, so there's a big cosmetic scar across it. So all the things I'm thinking of is okay, I got to touch her. I got to walk out, but I can't show that I got this thing on my back, And I was just thinking, there's an old Spencer Tracy quote, I think it was, that he said, you just say your lines and don't trip over the furniture. That's exactly what I was thinking. I just didn't want to trip and screw up walking out of the shot. And that's why I was so sensitive to the fact that everyone burst into laughter. It's like, oh, crap, I screwed it up.
Yeah, I would definitely feel the same in your shoes.
No, but it's just, it worked. It was a classic moment. So, and now I'm wondering if anyone's ever cosplayed as that photo you mentioned of you in the Boba Fett's armor, but with your glasses on. I want to see that.
I have not seen that, but I have seen. When I was at Celebration, someone had me sign an action figure. So I've seen many action figures of that, and I'm going to be doing a private signing for a friend, and they're getting a custom Funko Pop made of
wow
of me as without the helmet on. So
cool.
And I did see a Boba
that.
Fett that was I posted on my Instagram there's a Boba Fett in Disney World because they do their little stage shows, with the characters dancing around, and the guy did the move to one of the I think one of the bounty hunters, some of the female bounty hunters. So it's like, he stole my move.
Nice.
So have you ever been told that somebody's specifically done your specific costume of mishmash Boba Fett pieces?
No, but the Boba Fett aficionados have informed me which parts I've used. They have a name for my version of the suit and everything. So, yeah, there's a guy that did this great just recently. It came out in like March. He did a great self-published book on all the variations of Boba Fett costume, and mine's in there.
Hey.
So.
He's been partying at Jabba's palace for however many days. Like, he put things back in the wrong order. What are you gonna do?
That's right. He was in a hurry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but see, I'm wondering if there is a specific costumer listening right now that says there hasn't been a Don Bies Boba Fett yet. I'm going to be the first one to be the Don Bies Boba Fett from Special Edition.
I saw there was the holiday special cartoon Boba Fett, and other ones have done that. Yeah, so maybe there is. I just haven't seen it.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to put that out as a listener challenge. if you put together the Don Bies Boba Fett costume, Melissa will give you a prize.
Yes.
You got to do the move, though. You got to do the move.
Oh, yes, with the move.
Yes, definitely got to do the move. Boba Fett is a popular character. I be honest that I didn't realize it. I guess I did because my brother was super into it. But then when Boba Fett came back, The Mandalorian, and now his own show, Book of Boba Fett, I'm just curious, as one of the Boba Fetts, what feelings you have.
Well, it's funny because the character never spoke to me like it spoke to some. I met fans that are just Boba obsessed, and it's similar to how I was R2 obsessed. I could probably tell you every variant of R2 from the original films, like some people can do with Boba. I thought it was cool, it was cool armor and everything, but I never bought into that whole mystery thing. So for me to do it was, while I knew it was cool, I knew Boba was cool, I knew Boba was a thing. It was not like, the skies parted and the beam came down and I was the chosen one or anything like that. It didn't feel like that at all. A lot of people would say, "Oh, how did it feel?" It's like, well, it was hot and heavy. That's how it felt. But since to be part of it has been pretty wild. That's the one thing that so many will probably, if they remember me, that's the only thing they'll remember me for. I've joked that I could cure cancer, but on my gravestone it'll say play Boba Fett in special edition. So,
well, let's try and expand to everyone knowing what you do. So what else did you do as an archivist in general? So
the archives were loosely called that because essentially it was a warehouse with all the stuff in it. That's what it was. And matter of fact, when I started there, it was ILM was using it to store things. So we had things like the model DeLorean from Back to the Future in there, and other models from other films that were in there that weren't Lucasfilm based. I did this series of commercials back in '87, and then the lady that hired me for that, a lady named Judy Niles, who did the special events for Lucasfilm. They wanted to put together a big exhibition in 1988 at the Marin County Fair. The original actual impetus for them to do that, every year Marin County would ask Lucasfilm to have a presence at the fair every year, and they always declined. Well, this year they were trying to get community support behind building a facility near Skywalker Ranch. And so they thought, well, this was a good year as any to have our presence known. So what did they do? We put together this massive exhibition of all the archive models that we had, essentially, the ones that were in good enough shape to travel down the road. And so we did this, and it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of fun. And it was the first time a lot of these things were actually displayed to the public. a lot of these items were displayed to the public. And so we had things like an R2 and a 3PO, and it was, again, real costume. I made a metal stand for it, and we had a real R2, and people could come in, and it was like a little photo booth, and you come in and have your picture taken with R2 and 3PO. We had, the Walker from Empire Strikes Back. We had all the stuff, all the big ships and everything. And then we didn't want to just be Star Wars related. We wanted to be Lucasfilm. So there was some Indiana Jones stuff. Unfortunately, most of the Indiana Jones stuff was in England, being shot for Indiana Jones Last Crusade.
One of my favorite movies of all time.
And then the other thing that was happening was that year was 1988. Willow and Tucker were coming up. So we had a lot of Willow and Tucker stuff, but nobody knew what that was because the movies hadn't come out yet. But obviously the big draw was the Star Wars stuff. So we put this thing out there, and I don't think anybody realized, of course everyone realized how popular Star Wars is, but I don't think they realized what it was going to do to the, I don't know what their typical customer flow through. It was at the time, maybe 20,000 people over the 5 days, but we had 43,000 people come in with 3 to 4 hour waits.
Wow.
To get in, because the fire department started limiting how many people you could come in at a time. And we had people trying to break in, we had, it was funny. We had no real security. It was senior citizens that were volunteering. They were our security. So they were at the other doors, and we had people trying to break, come in and say, so-and-so said I could come in. And you have this little old lady saying, sorry, kiddo, get out of here. One guy walked up to this little lady, and he pulled back the cuff of his sleeve, and he had a knife tucked in there. And he goes, "You will let me in."
My God.
And the woman goes, "Son, it's not worth it." And the guy just turned around and walked away.
Wow. Jedi mind.
So we had a really good security team. And so it was a great thing. And then after that, a day or two into it, Lucasfilm started realizing the draw that these items have, and they started realizing, well, maybe we have something here, more of an asset than we thought we did. Maybe we could use this in some other way. So they started putting out. They had people come from Lucasfilm with ask questions about what was your favorite thing and everything. They were trying to gauge what the audience was. And of course, the one thing they all hated was the 3 hour wait and the heat, to get in. But
then they're not the real Star Wars fans that, go to Celebration just for the 3 hour wait and heat.
Right. I mean, we had people flying in from Europe just to see this exhibition. So all the news stations were there, their interviews being done left and right. And anyway, so after that, Lucasfilm realized we've got all this stuff. What can we do with it? So the first thing they thought, well, let's get it organized. So Debbie Fine, who was the head of the Lucasfilm Research Library, fascinating lady. She goes back to Paramount Pictures, and she did research for Francis Ford Coppola for the Godfather movies and stuff. She's really interesting lady. Sadly passed away since, but she was tasked by George specifically to look after the archives, and she really didn't want to. She could care less about Star Wars, so she hired me for 2 weeks to start cleaning and organizing the archives. And that 2 weeks led into something like 7 years. And
but the first 2 weeks were the ones where you just played with everything.
Yeah, that's where I played with everything. And it's also I learned how to become a model maker because I broke a couple of them. So I had to figure out how to glue them back together. So I remember taking the Y-wing off a shelf and not compensating for the fact that the little struts were hanging out over here. And I turned and I hit the upright of the thing, and I snapped off the back. It's like... So
battle damage, just like when your toys at home, when you break something off, it's like, oh, battle damage.
But then there were a lot of models that had pieces that were just they were in pieces already, so I would tack them back together too. And so the first thing was to try to figure out what was there. I was going through boxes. The archives at that point was just the dumping ground for people's garbage. They cleaned out an office, they moved it there. So we had like shelves and shelves of just stuff from like the legal department, so I would look through them to just see if there was anything of note. And some of them were, like really seemed to me really important documents. I would hope that they had copies. So I sent them up to the ranch to be properly gone through. There were really fascinating finds in there. Like, it was one of my favorite books, Once Upon a Galaxy, The Making of Empire Strikes Back by Alan Arnold. It was the original manuscript was there, that writer wrote. And it was fascinating reading it because I knew that text almost by heart. I didn't have to have the book side by side. And I could see that pages were excised from his novel that ultimately got published. You could see it because they'd have an X through it. And, it's fascinating to read some of that stuff. And a number of those things that were excised were relating to Carrie Fisher's illness, as they called it at that point. And it was, she's since become public with her drug challenges, but it was talked about a lot more in the book than it ultimately was made into. And they did the right decision by cutting it. But then there's other stuff, like there's a section in the book where he put a microphone on Irving Kershner when he was directing the whole carbon freeze scene. And that was all intact. But then what was even cooler, I found those cassettes.
Oh, wow.
And so I would pop them into a cassette and listen to them while I was working, and hearing firsthand these interviews that were being conducted raw, or in this case, like the raw audio of this thing that he was following him around. Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. And for me, as a big fan of not only the movies, but filmmaking, it was just lovely to be part of. I'd find boxes of cease and desist letters of people making their own Darth Vaders, and showing up at malls and things like that. Yeah, so it was just a bunch of cleaning out that kind of stuff. And then David Craig was a person that they had hired prior to me being there, and he had left since I had been there. And he was considered the first archivist because he was tasked by Debbie to make the archives be the archives as a proper archive should be, as opposed to a bunch of stuff in a warehouse. And he understood the need. I found all his research of where he went and talked to museums, and he didn't have a museum background, and neither did I. What would you do in a place where you're creating an archive, and what would you keep, and how would you organize it, and all that sort of research. And so he created an accession form, a paper accession form. So you would label give it a number, you would describe it, you would attach a photo, and he started doing that to some of it. And then a few years later, as I got into it more, I convinced them to buy me a computer. It was a Mac SE. And I learned how to make a database. I used FileMaker Pro. I think it was FileMaker Pro 2.0. And so I learned how to create a database. And then I started making the accession form in digital form. Then they built the archive building out at Skywalker Ranch. And I coordinated that move out to Skywalker Ranch, and then we expanded it, and we started making more computer accessioning forms. We got the database was more sophisticated. We started photographing things more. And so that's kind of what I was doing at the archives. In the meantime, then occasionally these appearances would come up, and I would do the appearances.
Well, and you mentioned briefly when we were talking about Jabba's palace that your wife was also there. Was she your wife at the time? Did you meet through ILM?
We met through, that's a funny story too. So in 1993, back up a little bit. As I said, after the 88 exhibition, there was a number of ideas of what would happen with the collection, with the archive collection. And they talked about museums, they talked about traveling exhibitions, they talked about this and that. They were looking at all sorts of things, partnering with other companies to do this and that and the other thing. There was at one point, there was a Lucas entertainment division. They were going to do a theme park, Lucasfilm theme. I mean, this was all in discussions phases. It never got very far. So they were always kind of looking for what they could do and make money off of these things sitting around. And so in 1993 or roughly 92, art exhibition promoter, Shinji Hata, came to Lucasfilm and proposed a Lucasfilm exhibition in Japan. And it wasn't just Star Wars, it was going to be Lucasfilm. So all the things were signed, they decided to do it. I was working with Mr. Hata to decide what was going to be in the exhibition. We were looking closely together, developing what we were going to be doing and that kind of thing. at the same time, we realized that about 100 of the items that he wanted were in not great condition to travel. They had been kind of knocked around after having been filmed and just simply put on shelves. So I put together a restoration team from ILM, of some ILM model makers, John Goodson being one of them, Nelson Hall being another one. And this is, by the way, roughly the time that Grant Himahara started working there. We set about for like 2.5 months, 3 months or so, restoring the models in anticipation for a July exhibition in Tokyo. And somewhere in April or so, I got a phone call at the archives, and there's a guy with a really thick Australian accent. And he said that they were doing a convention down in Melbourne, Australia, and they would like me to be their guest. And it turned out I was the third choice to be the guest. Because the first choice was a really cool choice, was Howard Kazanjian, who was the producer of Jedi, and he at the last minute bailed because he was working on a film and he couldn't get out of it, and he couldn't get it to Melbourne. So Shane Morrissey, who was the head of Star Walking, was the fan group, and Shane was good friends with Steve Sansweet. Now, Steve and I had just met a few years before. Shane called Steve up and asked him to be their guest, and Steve was still working at Wall Street Journal, and he couldn't take off the time that quickly to come to Melbourne, Australia. So Shane asked Steve, "Do you know of anybody else?" He said, "Well, why don't you ask Don? He's the archivist at Lucasfilm." So that's how I got the call. And at first I thought the call was a joke. I thought it was somebody pranking. And then I hung up with him, and I told John Goodson, of all people, one of the model makers, I say, I got this funny call. A guy wants me to come down to Australia to do a convention. He goes, "You going to do it?" And I go, "Nah, why would I? Nah, I wouldn't do it." He says, "Why not?" He said, "When would you ever get to go to Australia again?" I said, "Yeah, but I've got this project." And he said, "Just do it." So I'm like, okay. So I checked with Lucasfilm. They said, "Yeah, go for it." I didn't want to spend very long, and I didn't realize how far Australia was from from here. So I basically flew down for the weekend.
Wow!
Oh my gosh!
I got there on a Thursday night. And the convention started on Friday, and then I was meant to go back on Monday. And it was a blast. And the person that they put in charge of me, my keeper, ended up becoming my wife.
Aww,
and
what a great story!
Yeah, and she worked in the film business there and television, and she was, an events coordinator type, production coordinator type person, and a bit of a Star Wars fan. And we just hit it off, and it took 2 years or so of trying to figure out how this is going to work, but we eventually got together.
Wow. I hope you thanked John for convincing you to go.
I did. And it's funny because when I eventually met Howard Kazanjian, he came on set during episode 1, when I was there on episode 1. And my wife was there. She wasn't there that day, but she was with me in London. And our son had just been born. Our son was only like 4 months old. And I asked Lynn Hale, who's head of publicity, to introduce me to Howard. And when she did, I said, "I have you to thank for me getting married." And he looked at me like,
it's like, "I don't know you at all."
Yeah, he said, "I've never met you before." He says, "That's weird." and I explained the story. I said, "Thanks to you not being able to go to Australia, right, I had to go." So, and I've since met Howard a few more times, but I don't keep reminding him.
He's like, "That's that one guy."
I know, he's really.
But then she was a stand-in for the special editions?
So she worked at ILM as a model maker, but she also worked in the costume department because that's what she had some background in. And they just needed somebody they had for Cy Snoodles, they had another ILM employee that was her stand-in, I guess, and a lady named Andrea. And then they needed somebody for the Yesm, the Joe Cocker kind of guy. And if you look at any behind the scenes stuff, she's wearing like a white blouse, like a long blouse with black leggings. There's a number of behind the scenes stuff where you can see her in it.
So she's Joe Yauza, the big Yesm.
Yep. Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
They have some of the actual footage where she would do the move, and then CG was kind of, that idea was early. It wasn't like they were capturing her performance or anything. They wanted to give something the cameraman to point to. So she's not doing what they're doing. She's not singing. She's not performing. She's, It was just something so the cameraman wouldn't forget that there's somebody else in the frame. She eventually she did some wardrobe stuff for episode 1 and 2. Her hand is in episode 1. She's the hand of Anakin Skywalker in the pod race. So when something explodes and he has to accelerate through it, that's her hand pushing.
Amazing. Well, and you mentioned being part of a video game as well, the two of you.
Yeah. So around that same time was
Dark Forces 2.
Dark Forces 2. Yeah, thank you. They were introducing something which kind of came and went really quick, was the idea of the cutscene, So you'd cut the live action sequence and then go back to your first shooter action. I knew a lot of the games people because they would always come by for reference and of course being big fans, pretending not to be big fans, but they're geeking out over all this stuff. So I got to know quite a few of them. And then Justin Shin, who was the writer of the first one, a co-writer, I guess, I think he came up with the idea and then he co-wrote it with somebody else. And then he wrote the second one. And now he's actually a writer, director, cinematographer here in the Bay Area. It's funny because my wife has worked with him since. We found out that they needed costumes and props for those cutscenes. So they asked, I can't remember, I probably suggested that we do it, somehow. And so we did. My wife made all the costumes and then I did all the props. So I did first set of lightsabers since the original trilogy. So I did Kyle Katarn's lightsaber and all the other characters' lightsabers. Any special prop costume bits that, the holsters and Sarek, the bad guy, the bad
Jarek? Jarek, yeah. The blind one?
Yeah. I made that little thing that he wears, which I found out years later that he was in a Dracula movie with Christopher Lee. He was in a Hammer Dracula film in the 70s. If I'd have known that at the time, I would have totally geeked out over. And then I made the blaster that Kyle Katarn uses, which I've gotten so many questions over the years. What did I use? How did I make it? And unfortunately, after we made the stuff, they took them back. Games division took them because they thought they were going to be using them for either photographic reference or they're going to shoot some insert or something like that. So they took everything back, and then they never found them again. So somebody took them. Somebody's got them at home somewhere, I'm sure, or they threw them away. So all those props are missing.
Jeez.
But it was a lot of fun project. We got to go down to Los Angeles, and actually it was a stone's throw from where the original ILM was in Van Nuys, or it was a little studio where we shot all the stuff. And it was all against green screen. We had a little prop stuff. I made like an accelerator that they drove the ship with, but everything else was digital around them. So it's kind of like what they're doing now, that stuff, but it was much cruder.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, we should probably start wrapping up. One of our usual signing off questions is what your favorite Star Wars character is, but I feel like we already talked about R2-D2, or maybe it's special edition Boba Fett. So unless you have something else to add to that, I'll change the question a little bit and ask you, when you do autograph signings like what you did at Celebration, what is it that you sign most often? Like, what do people bring to you, or what do you have at your table?
It's kind of a split usually between R2 and Boba Fett. Occasionally there's the Bith character. I'm known for either Boba or the R2. But yeah, no, definitely my favorite character is R2. I think he actually is strong with the Force. And, if you think about how many times he got our heroes out of danger, I think I think he was the other that they spoke of. I don't think it was Leia.
Interesting. I like that. I'm going to watch them all again now with that just sort of percolating in the background. So cool. Well, if someone is interested in getting into your field, which as we've covered is a whole lot of fields, so whatever you make of that question, what would you recommend, to someone who saw the most recent trilogy and was like, I got to get into movies?
Yeah, it's different now than certainly when I got into it. When I got into it, the field was much smaller, the effects field. Even then, it seemed imposing. But the only thing is don't give up. If you want to be a filmmaker, make films. If just do it. One of the greatest things that we have now with the technology now is that filmmaking is so cheap. Everyone's got a camera, and they've got a movie studio in their pocket right now. So you can make it. It doesn't have to be fancy, and it's the storytelling that matters. So just do it. If you want to do any of the technical stuff, find groups like the R2 builders groups. There's model building groups out there. Get in there, learn the techniques, learn all the tools. Particularly, even if you want to do digital stuff, I think it's really important to learn about photography and real world things. Take something that's real and see how it applies before you make a digital version of it, because the real world physics are everything. And then to break in, it's like LA seems to be the place to be. San Francisco used to be one of the hubs, but not as much anymore. There's a lot of opportunities out there in the bigger cities, certainly in the United States, and as well as all over the world. But it's finding the way in is really the most challenging part. I happen to just be lucky. There are a lot of people far more talented than me that didn't get in because they didn't find the right door. It really matters to try to find that one person that will give you a break. And there's lots of people out there that I think will do that. And, if it's in visual effects, all the studios have people that you could talk to, at different events and here and there. And you could show reels and that sort of thing. But it is a lot harder. Like I said, I wouldn't probably get a job today, given my skill sets are compared to what other people's skill sets are.
I don't know. I think you're one of the few people that can put Bith musician Barkwin Dan on your resume and say, come on, if you need someone to play some cool tunes, I can do that while wearing a Bith head mask.
The most amusing thing about that is that I am musically illiterate. I cannot play a tune or move to a tune for the life of me.
So. Well, I think this is one of those cases of fake it till you make it, and it worked.
It totally
right.
was.
Movie magic. Yeah. Where can we find you if our listeners want to follow you on social media or upcoming work? I'd also love to hear a little bit about the Grant Imahara STEAM Foundation.
Yeah. So where I post all my kind of stuff is on Instagram, where I post the fan stuff. So that's kind of the place to find me. It's just Don Bies, DonBies, where I'm posting stories and recollections of things that I did before I forget them. As far as the Grant Imahara STEAM Foundation, grantimaharafoundation.org, we are opening up now more to submissions. Our first couple of years of it was getting the foundation up on its feet and running. We're accepting submissions now for funding for different projects. So keep an eye on that page as well.
What type of projects are you guys looking at funding?
Anything from typically K through 12 educational stuff at the moment, anything related to STEAM education. So science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. I had a really productive meeting with the guys that were helping the STEM room at the celebration while I was down there.
That was such a fabulous room. My daughter had so much fun doing activities in there.
So it's different. A lot of it is at the moment programs that could be run as extracurricular activities in schools, but we're open to anything at the moment. We've got a application that, you just write into the info at grantimaharafoundation.org and request an application and send you one. Very
cool. Yeah, that STEAM classroom was excellent at Celebration. I felt like I needed a kid to go in there with me. So at some point, I'm just gonna have to borrow James's kid at some.
Yeah, there you go.
Check out some of those things because there's lots of that at Comic-Con, but I was really encouraged to see it also at Celebration. So
I'm hoping that's going to be more of a thing at conventions going forward. That would be great, because that's where you really can expose a lot of people to that kind of technology. The kids, that is, so.
Yeah, it's never too late. I would love to dork out in those rooms too. So
yeah. No, I say thanks for all the stuff, Melissa, you've been doing too with the foundation stuff. We try to keep Grant's name out there. That's great. I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, and I'm really excited to hear that maybe there's going to be a connection with more conventions because it was the first thing I thought of when I saw the STEAM classroom at Celebration. Job, because I am used to San Diego Comic-Con where like NASA's there and, local universities have panels about, their stuff. And then at Celebration, it was really, to me, it was, James and I did 2 science of panels, but that was pretty much it that I saw. So hopefully every year there'll be a little bit of a creep, but it really does feel a lot more like ground floor. Like you could really mold the ones at Celebration. So,
well, you have something coming up at the Academy Museum, don't you?
Yeah, they asked me to come down and talk. I believe it's July 28th at the Academy Museum, and I'm going to be talking about what I've done. Very similar to what I've done here, probably a lot more condensed, but I think we're going to mainly be talking about R2D2.
Yeah. Anyway, Mark Hamill was going to go to the Academy Museum, but he got told by his uncle he couldn't apply to the Academy until the next season.
There you go. I like it. Great. Well, we'll make sure we put those details in the show notes. So if you're in the LA area or have just been needing an excuse to go to the Academy Museum like I have, check that out. So
it's a beautiful museum, actually. They have some really fascinating items there.
Yeah, no, I've heard nothing but good things about it, and seeing it featured in the last couple of years worth of at the Academy Awards or whatever has really made me want to go see it and see a movie screening there. They showed A New Hope, I believe.
And it was an unadulterated version of A New Hope. It was not a special edition version, which was really fascinating.
Yeah.
Apparently the film broke at least once.
I heard that it needed your touch of keeping it in good repair.
Well, a few years ago, they had a Return of the Jedi screening at Pixar, of all places. And it must have been the anniversary, so it must have been 2013. I went to it with my kids, and they had never seen a film projected before. I hadn't seen a film projected in 10 or 15 years at that point.
Right.
And it was fascinating to watch the life that it has aside from what's going on screen, so
yeah, that's amazing. I never thought about that. Well, Don, I want to thank you so much for your time. We'll probably split this into 2 episodes, so thank you so much for getting us between Star Wars Celebration and San Diego Comic-Con episodes.
Yeah, don't be sorry. This is great. we could sit here and chat all the time. So yeah, this is really good that we have so much stuff.
Well, great. I'm glad. I really appreciate you having me, and I love talking about it. So it was a great time.
Well, thanks so much for being here, Don. That wraps up our 2-part interview. We want to thank our guest, Don Bies, so much for his time and all of his great stories. And we want to thank all of you for listening, especially those of you who found us because of our Star Wars Celebration panels.
If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies or know an expert we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram, or at Star Warsologies, StarWarsologies @gmail.com. We also have a fan group on Facebook that is simply called Star Warsologies Podcast Fan Group. So that's where you can find us. Please rate, review, subscribe, like to the podcast on your favorite service.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including Collectopolis, Resilient Squadron, and the flagship show Skywalking Through Neverland. There's also a YouTube show called Today in Star Wars History, and you can find all of those at skywalkingnetwork.com.
See you next time on Star Warsologies, when we are going back to convention panels. We're each hosting panels at San Diego Comic-Con, July 21st through the 24th.
That's right. James and I are each hosting a panel at Comic-Con in a couple of weeks. First up, on Friday, July 22nd, there's The Science of Jurassic World, hosted by James. That's 6 to 7 p.m. in the Grand 12 and 13 Ballroom at the Marriott. And on Saturday, from 1 to 2 p.m., I'll be hosting The Mandalorian Under the Helmet. That's a panel with lots of experts who can talk about The Mandalorian. And that will be in the Grand Ballroom, room 10 and 11 at the Marriott. We hope you'll come out and see us, chat with us after the panels, and support Star Warsologies. Thanks so much. Woo! Comic-Con!